Hi, Ross McLean here. What if I was to tell you the American fentanyl crisis and problems aren't only with Mexico, that maybe your biggest problem is Canada up on the northern border? Canada has just recently been busted. The RCMP busted a super lab, which is the largest drug lab ever found in the world. It produces tons of fentanyl. We've got real issues in Canada with money laundering, Chinese influence, organized crime, and it all spills down into the United States. You need to be concerned about it. I'm going to play for you now a radio interview that I did with Richard Syrett. I'm a former law enforcement officer. I used to deal in anti-terrorism and those sort of issues, and I think you need to be aware of what's going on the Canadian border. I apologize a little bit for the sound. It was my cell phone for doing this, but that's because, with trade, we don't really allow U.S. cell phone providers up here. We don't allow U.S. banks up here. That's why Trump is looking at all the tariffs to get free trade going. Now, without further waiting, here's my interview with Richard Syrett.
Last fall, there was a massive drug super lab in Falkland, British Columbia that was taken down. It was connected to international organized crime. This was done after months of investigation by the RCMP. They seized enough fentanyl to kill every Canadian twice. AR-15s, submachine guns, cartel-style meth production. This was next-level organized crime. But the kicker, federal police say the drugs weren't even headed to the U.S. So where are they going? And is Canada now a global hub for the drug trade? Ross McLean is a crime and security specialist and host of the McLean Chronicles podcast. Ross, welcome back. How are you?
Yeah, good to be here with you, Richard, talking about this. We do have a problem in Canada. We don't manufacture a whole lot anymore. We don't export a whole lot anymore, but except for fentanyl drugs, we seem to do pretty good at manufacturing those and getting those out to the world. And that's not making us the best friends of some of our neighbors, that's for sure.
I'm not being facetious here, but is Canada becoming a narco state?
Well, narco state, you tend to think of that in the terms of when that first came up, right? Which is guys in green camos sitting around smoking cigars and shooting guns. But for all intents and purposes, we are. We are. And as you said, use the word next level to describe this level of crime that's going on here. This is next level. This is as sophisticated right now as the pharmaceutical industry, right? And that's a very expensive industry. We've got a few of them here. We've lost a few of them here in Canada before. But you have chemist engineers who design drugs. They make precursors. They put them together. You go through the distribution of them. Very sophisticated plants have to be built with very sophisticated materials in order to produce these drugs. This is no low-level thing. I mean, the setup of that lab, I haven't maybe seen a dollar sign on it, but I'm sure it was more than a few $1 million to set that lab up easily. And then they're going to have people that are chemists and engineers. Who knows? Were they trained in our schools? Did they come over here, on student visas to learn to get their chemistry degrees, Richard? Probably. And the amount of money laundering that goes on with this just continues.
And what about the involvement of foreign cartels in this and organized crime here? What are we talking about? China, Iran, India? Who?
And Mexico. Look, the reason they call it the drug trade is because there is a lot of trade. People may not be aware, but for the last 20, 25 years, at least, Canada has been the leading importer of marijuana into the U.S. Everybody would off their head, well, no, it must be Mexico. They've got the temperature. No, Canada's done it because of our organized crime setup here. And what happens is they'll send fentanyl down there and trade that for meth or pot or something else is what they'll do. And a lot of the trading hub takes place in around Chicago for a lot of it going on. It's very sophisticated. They bring the drugs up just like a logistics company would, up to the States. They make their trades for the different drugs, guns, whatever it is they need, and it comes into the country. It's very high-level stuff.
The RCMP says the drugs weren't destined for the U.S., but abroad, whatever that means. First of all, do you believe that statement? And if not the U.S., where are these drugs going?
Well, I mean, the thing with fentanyl, what's interesting is This lab that they busted in BC was so sophisticated that the lab was actually making what are the precursor drugs to then go make the actual fentanyl and things like that. Like it's like we have plants up here that just assemble cars, right? They don't really make the car parts in Canada. We bring them in from different places, we assemble them, and we send them out. Right. That's what you typically think about for cars. But in this case, for the drugs, they're manufacturing the raw material. They're bringing in raw materials, making the precursors, making the things that go into the drugs. They own the whole vertical, is what they found with that lab. They're doing everything, one-stop shopping, to send these absolutely deadly, egregious drugs out into the world. And the U.S. for sure is going to be one of the destinations. But the thing with fentanyl is it's so small, they can send it out in envelopes a lot of the times. And here's a number I have for you, Richard, and the audience. Do you know what the markup is on fentanyl from the precursors to what they sell it for? It's about 80,000% is the markup. Oh,
Lord. Dear Lord.
Yeah, they're making very, very good money off of this, Richard. That's why it's going on. And you have to ask yourself, why is it going on so incredibly here with so much money? It's usually because you got people involved that should be looking after this and dealing with this, and they're looking the other way. You know, that's typically what you would see.
Wait a minute. They're looking the other way. What are we talking about? Politicians, police looking the other way?
Yeah, potentially. Potentially, you have to look at that. When you look at a corporation, I used to work and do worldwide logistics, and when you look and you start seeing property disappearing from a warehouse or a supply chain or some such thing, you start looking, and usually you have someone on the inside who's helping facilitate it and sees a weakness in it. And that's what you need sometimes to get this stuff across the border. I mean, look at the other area we've got. Look at trucking in Canada. It's in shambles, right? Anybody can buy a truck. Any kind of rig gets labeled as being safe. We've got accidents everywhere, drivers with fake IDs running across the country. What are the odds that what they're running probably isn't the most legitimate stuff in the world, right? What are the odds? So the odds are very high, if you ask me. So we've got all these industries creating a complete logistical supply chain for the drug trade. It's very sophisticated. And we have not been able to turn it off for some reason.
So when Donald Trump was threatening tariffs initially, and he was citing the fentanyl pouring across our border as an excuse, and Canadian politicians and others were saying, wait a minute now, it's only like 46 pounds of fentanyl from Canada going across the border. But it's not what you're saying is they're making the component parts, the ingredients for the fentanyl, then it gets assembled elsewhere. So in fact, we're sending the component, the constituent parts of the fentanyl into the United States. So technically, we're not sending fentanyl in huge amounts. Is that sort of the get around here?
No, that's not the get around. We are assembling and putting it all together here as well as being dealers in the constituent parts, right? For doing that. And look, it's the most ridiculous thing in the world I hear with the media saying, oh, look, we're only 1%. There was only 43 pounds that was caught at the border. You fools. It's not what you catch. It's what you don't catch that goes by that is the real number. So it's like me saying I stop a guy carrying a bag of pot when I'm a cop and say, oh, look, there's no more drugs available in Toronto because I got a full 6-ounce bag off this guy. It's ridiculous. The police, I mean, for things like cocaine, there's some numbers they throw around that only about 3% of the cocaine that gets moved around gets caught. So you can take that number that everybody's saying, oh, it's only this much. That's only what you're catching. That's not what's going across the border, for crying out loud.
Right. And even 43 pounds, that's enough to kill 1 million people, actually. So we have this lab described as a supermarket for organized crime. How closely linked are drug operations, gun smuggling, and human trafficking in Canada?
Well, it's all part of the supply chain. And it's interesting you brought up the human smuggling, because down in the States, what was going on during the Biden years, the smuggling of people across the border by the cartels, they switched from doing a lot of drugs to dealing with smuggling people because it would cause way more profit. You weren't as likely to get caught, and there wasn't very big jail sentences for it. And they were making a fortune smuggling people instead of heroin, cocaine, and drugs typically. But they used that money to set up other things. So you see that Mexico has got some of their people up here that are working with the cartels are up here putting this stuff together. I mean, Richard, how many times on your station have I heard the stories about they've arrested 4 guys from Chile who are in here doing home invasions on houses? Right. There are auto thefts. A bunch of guys from Venezuela came in, and it seems you can just sit here and operate at crime at will because there's not much serious sentencing for it. There just isn't, and the odds of getting caught are very, very, very low. So it's a game that people are playing, and we're well known for it right now.
The precursor chemicals that are combined to make fentanyl. Some of those are produced here, but others are coming into the country, presumably. Where are the precursor chemicals coming from, and how are they getting into the country unnoticed?
So China used to send over the precursors. I mean, back in the day, so people can understand it, and I'm not a chemist myself, but back in the day, Sudafed used to be used to make a lot of this. So you'd have people going into all the drugstores, buying up all the Sudafed, right? Or stealing all the Sudafed so they could take it back to make the drugs. Then they started locking down the Sudafed and only saying 1 per person, and they cut that one off. But what was happening is China was sending over all the precursors in bulk, getting here. Now they've got shipping, air flights that come in here, people that come over here, all sorts of ways of getting it onto our property. But now what they're doing is they're actually making the precursors here, which is another level of sophistication above just the assembly of the drugs. And that's one of the things they saw going on at the super lab, which, by the way, this super lab doing all of this, they've only arrested 1 person, Richard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One guy's running all this, the biggest super lab, moving all this stuff all around the world?
Not likely.
But then that must be it, though. Just like the 43 pounds we caught was all the fentanyl. This is not all the bad guys. We got this one guy.
Presumably the money, the profits from these super labs is being laundered somewhere. We know TD in the United States just got its fingers wrapped gently again for money laundering. Is it possible that these super labs are laundering their money at a bank up here at some financial institution?
Not only possible, they absolutely are doing it. There's a report called the Cullen Report. It was done a few years ago. People can look it up online and read about it. It talks about the money laundering, drug dealing that's going on in British Columbia, and it's egregious. I mean, there's a whole system where people come over, take the money, run into the casinos, gamble a little bit, then take all the chips back in and get a check and then deposit that over here. Then they buy real estate. And that's part of the reason why all the real estate was taken off like crazy in British Columbia, because they needed that to launder money, when you're doing things. Way back in the day when rappers started out, way back in the day, and everybody was selling crack cocaine in the streets, all the rappers started wearing lots of jewelry, right? Lots of diamonds, lots of golds, and going around on their trips, right? Right. Why? Because they were moving a lot of money with those diamonds to places. They would go across borders into places. The diamonds would come out and would go on zirconiums to come back. It's a way of laundering and moving money around. So you use different items to launder money. In Canada, real estate is used for a lot of that.
Unbelievable. Ross, how do we listen to the McLean Chronicles and what's coming up next?
Yeah, they can catch me on my YouTube podcast at McLean Chronicles Podcast or on X at McLean Chronicles. We've got a bunch of shorts out these days talking about our YouTube shorts, talking about our monetary problems with the U.S. and how exciting that's going to be in the next little while. Especially when one of the things Trump asked for, Richard, was to have a joint strike force looking at the drug problem up here. I think he wants to have the FBI and Kash Patel operating in Canada, not just listening for what we're doing about it. So he wants to take a hard look at how we're investigating drug crimes up here.
Oh, that's a must listen. The McLean Chronicles, YouTube, and on X. Ross, great work as always. Thanks for your insights.
Thanks a lot, Richard.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this material, please hit the like button, share, pass it on to someone else who needs to know this information in the U.S., tag them on it, share it. You need to be aware of what's happening on the northern border. This is Ross McLean for the McLean Chronicles.